Hello again. I have been thinking lately about the way in which much of what I see in Britain now is completely topsy-turvy. A couple of weeks ago, my wife fell over and we thought it wise to go to casualty. Not that it's called that these days. In the event, it wasn't a serious thing. She just wanted to get checked out and have an x-ray to see if she'd cracked a bone. The nearest casualty department to us by distance is King George's Hospital in Redbridge, an East London borough. This was a Friday morning at about 10 o'clock, so we assumed it would not be too crowded. How wrong we were. There was a lengthy queue which we joined. Two things struck me at once. The first is that going to casualty used to be just that, for casualties. Broken arms, nasty cuts, road accidents, that sort of thing. At King George's, this department is now called an urgent treatment centre. Not one of the people in the queue seemed to have any physical injuries or even to be particularly ill. A nurse was walking around doing triage and I was able to overhear what people had come to the hospital for. I'm always curious to know what's going on. Sore throats, digestive problems, none of them appeared to be emergencies as most of us would understand them. The other thing I noticed was that many of those in the line could not speak very good English. Sometimes they brought children with them to interpret and so on. There were only one or two white English people in the whole queue, which stretched for a considerable distance. The doctor, when we eventually saw her, was needless to say also foreign, an African with a very strong accent, and we had to keep asking her to repeat what she said, and she herself was unfamiliar with common English words. Lord knows how she managed to communicate with people whose own grasp of English was not very good. I would think it's a recipe for disaster. This was the situation then in an English hospital. A foreign doctor dealing with a lot of foreigners. The punchline, of course, is that it's all being paid for by the taxes and national insurance contributions of ordinary working people, like the viewers here. I was told later that many illegal immigrants or undocumented migrants, as we are now supposed to call them, use the emergency departments of that hospital because they can't sign on with a GP. This apparently is quite a common thing in London these days. I've heard other people, friends of ours, at hospitals in London that have gone to casualty, and they've said that they haven't seen any English people at all there. It struck me that these people had probably put nothing into the system, but simply arrived in the country and began taking before they had even troubled to learn how to speak English. It is for this reason that the government are now, of course, eyeing pensioners to see if they could somehow be exploited to solve the economic crisis which the pandemic has created. The government needs more money. There's no point looking to refugees and asylum seekers for it, obviously. They're actually taking more out of the system than they're ever likely to put in. The advantage of pensioners is that these are the same people who have worked all their lives paying into the National Health Service and so on. They must obviously be worth a bob or two more if you play your cards right. One way you can get more money out of pensioners would be to freeze the state pension for a few years. That would be worth £4 or £5 billion a year. Or what about means testing the old age pension and treating it like other benefits, not giving it to those who have a certain amount of savings? Then there are those private pensions that people pay from their own money and sometimes pay into for 40 years. Could there be a way of getting them to pay more tax on these? These are all ideas which are floating around at the moment. The pensioners are looking like a really good way of getting money for the government. There's a cynical assumption behind the idea of using pensioners as a new cash cow to raise money, and it is this. Most old people don't change the way that they vote after a certain age. If somebody has voted Tory all his life, then he's likely to carry on doing so after retirement, even if Johnson and his cronies start picking his pocket. So there's no point currying favour with pensioners, it's a lost cause. You might just as well rob them for all you can get out of them. One begins to ask sometimes what the point is of working hard in the first place. After all, you'll get the benefits of the National Health Service even if you never do a day's work in your life. If you remain on state benefits and look poor, then you'll have a better chance of getting a council house too. It is poor people whom the state rushes to help, not those who are trying to do their best to look after themselves and their families. Try applying for any benefits if you've been sensible with your money and saved a little regularly, rather than just pissing it up the wall, if you'll forgive the vulgarity of the expression. The question anybody, however old and frail, will be asked is, do you have savings of more than £16,000? If so, you will not be entitled to any help at all from the state. You'll have to pay the full price for anything you need. In this way, those who work hard and make provision for their future are penalised, and have to watch others who have not bothered to work or save being given a raft of things for nothing. There is something fundamentally wrong with the system which actively penalises those who have been sensible with their money and tried to stand on their own feet. If my boiler packs up, I have to pay to have it fixed. Obviously, I expect that. If a refugee in a council house has trouble with his boiler, he rings the council and they'll come round and fix it for nothing. How is all this paid for? Well, I pay quite a bit in income tax and council tax, and this is where the money comes from to finance everything. A young man may step off a dinghy on the beach of Dover, and at once my money is used to subsidise him and in many cases pay for him entirely. All his housing, fuel bills, food, clothing, everything else. I really think I must be a bit of a mug sometimes. I'm not calling for a return to the way that the poor were treated in Victorian England. I don't want to see workhouses or anything of that sort. But at one time, industry and thrift were rewarded rather than punished. Those given council houses were working families who were determined to get on. Of course, there should be a safety net for those who, through no fault of their own, fall on hard times. But I'm damned if I see why Britain should be importing foreigners and helping them when there are plenty of old people in the country who have worked hard and done their best and could do with a little help in their old age. By the by, this isn't a question of special pleading on behalf of a poor old person. I'm certainly old, but I don't need help from the state or anybody else. I see plenty of old people who do need it though, and it looks to me as though our own people are always at the back of the queue these days, which is frankly shocking.